Okay, it is 4:30, so welcome everyone. I'd like to call the special council meeting to order and acknowledge that we are holding our meeting today and that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And I'd like to notify all attendees of the meeting that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. I'll look to council now for adoption of this agenda. Moved and seconded. Any comments? All in favor? Motion is carried. And do we have anyone signed up for public commentary today?
Yes, Christine Lowther is signed up to speak for item 4.2, the development variance permit for 653 Parlee Place. So Christine, I'm just going to allow you to talk and I'll unmute you for 2 minutes to speak to council.
Welcome, Christine.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. In Aaron's report, under criteria, protection of natural features, I guess I just wanted to point out that, well, it says no net loss of vegetation is expected. That's because the property was already cleared of the old trees a long time ago. But the main point I wanted to make was I didn't see anything on the report regarding Tofino's, I don't know if it's goal or policy mandate of dark night skies, and that neighborhood's bright light impact has been increasing steadily. And well, it's not the only one, obviously, but so I'm just wondering if it's possible, if particular or relevant lighting types could be one of the conditions for this application. And then with the final thought is, are we enforcing our dark night skies policy enough? And that's all I want to say. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Christine. It's not really a question period at this point. I'm not sure if we normally respond to the commentary at the front of the meeting, but if you would like to put those questions forward during question period, we could provide the best answer that we have for you. Okay, I'll move on to presentations and reports. And this is item 4.1. And this is a report from Chief Elections Officer, from Corporate Services, about the 2021 Chief Election Officer appointment and Ministerial Order. Elise, did you have a presentation? I see one. There we go.
Sorry, I was just muted there. Yes, I do have a presentation. Thank you, Mayor Anderson. This presentation will be quick. I'll run you through the high points of the report before council today, including the background of why we're here, the appointment of a CEO and deputy, the by-election timeline that staff have drafted for the 2021 by-election, an overview of the request to the Minister of Municipal Affairs for a ministerial order, and a bit of a hiccup in our initial communications plan that we've come to council to try and amend. So I think we all know that because of the resignation of Mayor Josie Osborne on November 18th, council must appoint a chief election officer as soon as practicable, after that vacancy occurred. And staff did consider the holiday season in what was practicable in considering both voters and candidates in the election timelines, as the by-election has to be held within 80 days of the appointment, and there is quite a clock that starts ticking after the appointment is made. So the duties of a chief election officer, just to sort of give you the high points of them, and they were included in the report as Appendix 1, are the general elections administration, receiving nomination documents, declaring candidates, administering voting opportunities and counting ballots, and then also declaring the results. We also work with Elections BC to monitor the compliance of election advertising. However, it is not our sole duty, and it certainly does lie more so with Elections BC. We can also delegate some of that authority to other election officials, as well as the deputy election officer, chief election officer may act in place of the CEO in any case. And there is a solemn declaration required for all election officials to ensure the integrity of the process and impartiality of all election officials. And those will be administered for the CEO and DCEO immediately or as soon as possible so that we can begin the process together. As I mentioned, the report does highlight this timeline put together by staff, sort of highlighting the big dates for both voters and candidates in the by-election. So very much sort of a project management style approach to elections, as you must really count the days and understand sort of the timing that goes into all of this. So if you have questions about any of these sort of significant dates, I'm happy to answer any questions. Maybe I'll pause right now. Seeing none, that's just fine as well. I can certainly answer them outside of the meeting context if that's something you would like.
Just a note for any council members, I don't have everybody on the screen when there's a shared screen. On my own screen, I only have 5 out of the 6 councillors. So if you want to speak up, you may have to use your audio instead of raising your hand. Okay, Lise, carry on.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. I'll move on to the ministerial order. So since August of this year, over 10 ministerial orders have been issued in order to support legislative and bylaw adjustments to conduct safe by-elections or assent votes during the COVID-19 pandemic. And those orders have varied depending on the jurisdiction and the needs of that jurisdiction, but in general, they are to promote sort of easier safety guidelines to be inserted into what is a fairly rigid process outlined in the Local Government Act and People's Bylaws. So either adjusting the timelines for the acceptance of mail ballots or reducing the high-touch interactions by allowing for oral declarations and reducing the number of contacts necessary by adjusting mail ballot procedures. So here I've just listed basically the high-level summary of what we are requesting or what we hope to request from the Minister of Municipal Affairs for the District of Tofino by-election. So that would include allowing all eligible electors to vote by mail if they choose. And that's because currently the Local Government Act only permits voting by mail by persons who have a physical disability, illness, or injury that affects their ability to vote. And so we'd like to expand that to anyone who would choose to vote in this manner. We've also requested we will request to use a secrecy sleeve instead of a secrecy envelope. And this might seem like a small consideration, but as this is our first time doing mail-in ballots, we did sort of consult with a lot of other municipalities about their experiences and just what happened to them while they were doing mail ballot voting. And it is in our bylaw that we have an envelope and we don't have time to amend that bylaw. And so a secrecy sleeve was preferred by other local governments because a lot of the time they ended up ripping the ballot when they opened the secrecy envelope. And if we could use a sleeve, that would be much appreciated. Giving the CEO authority to determine time limits for mail-in ballots as well as when to process those ballots. And that was also sort of in discussion with other local governments that CEOs have requested flexibility to determine the dates that voters can request a mail ballot, because those dates are actually specified in the bylaw. So if we can have a little bit of flexibility with that, it does allow us to provide them earlier if we receive them earlier from our printers. And that's sort of the calculation we're making there, is that we may get a larger request for mail ballots than normal. And so being able to ship those out as soon as possible would be highly useful. And then the last request would be for the ability for election officials to take oral declarations rather than a written signature. And I'll note that that wouldn't apply in every case. It is sort of only for when signing the voting book. However, when someone makes a solemn declaration, they would still have to sign that solemn declaration. The process for this order is, it takes approximately 2 weeks for the ministry to process them, depending on the complexity of the request. I don't expect any more than 2 weeks, and then we would come back as the CEO or DCEO to council in order to get approval to implement the order, and that is required. So we would come back at the first opportunity to council to be able to implement those changes. The last part of the report was added as an addendum, and this is because I just recently became aware, unfortunately, that the Westerly News will not be publishing an edition on December 30th, which does disrupt our notification schedule for 2 statutory ads, and that would be the second notice of advanced registration, as well as the first notice of nomination. So that's not a big deal, so long as we can get approval from council to notify the public in an alternative fashion. And so the section of the community charter allows us to do that so long as we give notice to the public within the same time period as we would if it was published in a newspaper, in the same frequency, and provided that the notice sort of gives the equivalent amount of notice to the public as if it were published in a newspaper. So staff is requesting approval to notify the public during the week of December 30th using our email distribution list, social media ads, and on our website. And then 1 statutory ad will run for both of those notices. It's just the second one that is disrupted by that missed Westerly edition. Now I have the recommendations from the report on the screen, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Are there any questions?
Perhaps I'll stop my screen share so you can see everyone. Oh, and I didn't realize my video wasn't on. Pardon me. Rude.
I don't see anyone's hand up. I may get you to return to that screen.
Sure.
I can actually, I've got it in front of me. I can move the recommendation that pursuant to sections 54(4) and 58(1) of the Local Government Act, Elise Gocher-Bergman be appointed Chief Election Officer for the District of Tofino 2021 by-election with the power to appoint other election officials as required, and that Cass Spence be appointed Deputy Chief Election Officer for the District of Tofino 2021 by-election.
Okay, second. Seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
Okay, and then I'll move that pursuant to sections 94(4) of the Community Charter, the Chief Election Officer be authorized to provide notice by alternative means of the close of advanced registration and of the notice of nomination of the close.
Second. Seconded. Discussion, comments? All in favor? Motion is carried. So that has all been moved then as requested, Elise?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. We'll move on the agenda then to the development variance permit for Tokarek. Hope I pronounced that correctly. 653 Parlee Place. And a report from Community Sustainability. Mr. Thick.
Hello, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I will have a brief presentation, so I'll just share my screen. Okay, so the presentation that we are looking at currently pertains to the application for a development variance permit at 653 Parlee Place. So this will be the 10th development variance permit of the year, or the 10th development variance permit application that we've received this year. We'll be looking to vary the District of Tofino zoning bylaw. The goal of this variance is to reduce the minimum required front yard setback in an RA1 zone from 12.2 meters, so that's 40 feet, to 5.17 meters, which is about 17 feet. The purpose of this request is to permit a caretaker's cottage to be sited closer to the front lot line that's running adjacent to Parlee Place. So this is the location of the subject property, sort of midway up the Parlee Place cul-de-sac. Here's a survey that's been provided by the applicant showing the proposed location of the building. It's worth noting that although the building is outside of the required setbacks, the area that's kind of closest to Parlee Place is actually mostly occupied by a deck and a set of stairs. From the main front yard line that runs parallel to Parlee Place, it's actually 6.88 meters. However, where the property kind of intersects with the Parlee Place cul-de-sac, that is reduced to 5.17 meters. When we're considering these, we usually take a look at a certain set of criteria based on kind of objectives in the OCP and other policies. So taking a look at the form and character of the street area or neighborhood, many of the nearby lots are developed with houses, and many of them also have caretakers cottages. Pardon me. The overall character of the neighborhood is not expected to be significantly affected by the requested variance. It will actually fit in general with the uses that are already existing in that area. Regarding ecological functioning and topography of the lot, the subject property is relatively flat, should not require major site preparation. My understanding is that most of the clearing associated with the siting of this particular caretaker's cottage, as well as the future main residence, has already occurred. There's no development permit areas noted on the lot or other environmentally sensitive areas, so this isn't a major concern for staff. Design siting should account for solar exposure to public and private spaces. One of the primary reasons for this particular development request is to allow for more space in the southern area of the property, which will allow for greater solar exposure to the primary house. The siting of the caretaker's cottage further from the primary dwelling, as would be permitted by this variance permit, is expected to increase the potential solar exposure to that place as well. As far as privacy goes, my understanding is that there is currently a buffer of vegetation, and that buffer is expected to remain. And this would be buffering kind of the property to the east and west properties, pardon me, to the east and west, as well as the north property line, which runs parallel to Parlee Place. So staff anticipate that it will not, the variance will not kind of allow the caretaker's cottage to be a significant imposition along the street. However, it is worth noting that we do not have currently any bylaws that would restrict the removal of that buffer area should the applicant decide to do that. Conversations with the applicant have indicated that they're concerned with privacy and would like to maintain as much privacy as is possible from the road and from neighboring properties. Regarding views from neighboring properties, the variance isn't expected to change the views. It's anticipated that as the property is developed, any structures will be noticeable from neighboring properties and from the road. However, this variance will not greatly increase the impact of what's already permitted under zoning. And as far as flexibility in the building design and impact to neighboring properties, the variance is designed to allow an alternate siting so that the applicant can complete the development of the property to their proposed site plan, or kind of their desire to have a little bit of extra space in the southern portion of the property. As far as impact on neighboring properties, comments have been solicited through the standard notification procedure for these applications. So that notification went out on November 27th of this year. No responses have been received from that notification. Staff are currently recommending approval of the development variance permits. Other options would be to either deny the application or to defer the application to a later date if council decides to do that. So at this point, if there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Thick. I'm just wondering if, were you in the meeting when we had a speaker at the front of, in the public comments with some questions around our dark sky policies and how it might apply to this application? I don't believe it applies except during development permit, which is different. But anyways, could you clarify how that might apply to a residential zone?
Sure. I joined, I think, probably about a minute or two too late. I just heard the end of Christine's comments. But typically, in terms of the dark sky policy, it is a policy, so it's not the same as enforcing a bylaw. Usually with development permits and also with rezonings, we include those as conditions associated with any of the designs or the buildings. This property is already zoned to permit what's being proposed, so it would be a main house with a caretaker's cottage. The variance is mostly just requesting a relaxation of the front yard setback. So it's it's challenging through a development variance permit to impose these kinds of requests on the applicant, as it's not necessarily the appropriate legal mechanism to do so. It's more that they're simply asking to relax the front yard setback, as opposed to a change in use or building in a particularly environmentally sensitive area.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll now turn it over to council if there are any questions for Mr. Thick. Councillor Law.
Just a quick question pertaining to that last, the issue of the lights and possibly the vegetation buffer. If we can't, as you say, attach conditions, but can we do a strong recommendation to the applicant that lights have been brought up? And it was actually brought up to me personally by a neighbor, concern of lights close to the road and shining across. So is that something we can do? I mean, it doesn't have any necessarily legal weight behind it, but what do you think?
Yeah, certainly. Usually with things like that, if there's something that staff notice on a proposed design where somebody's trying to attach a large floodlight to the side of the building or something like that, that would cause a major visual disturbance either to neighboring properties or to wildlife in the area. Usually we try to recommend that that they move away from that sort of a thing and sort of explain the situation, explain why it may be prudent to not do that. However, is challenging, kind of as I mentioned, to compel an applicant to do that at this point.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, I guess we'll look at the recommendation then. Did anyone care to move that?
Sure, I'll move the development variance permit number 1020 to vary District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997, Lot 6, District 127, Tla-o-qui-aht District Plan VIP 62054 be approved as follows. Vary part 18.6.1 of the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 770/1997 to reduce the minimum required front yard setback in an RA1 zone from 12.2 meters to 5.17 meters as shown on Exhibit A to DVP 10-20.
Is there a second? Seconded. Any further comments or discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you, Mr. Thick. And that brings us to the end of the open agenda, except for question period. Are there any questions?
Through the mayor, oh, I can just see someone is signing up now. Christine, if you'd like to tell us what item you're asking a question about, I assume it's item 4.2, but can you just confirm that in the Q&A box? Thank you. I'm going to unmute Christine Lowther for up to 2 minutes to ask a question about item 4.2 on the agenda. There you go, Christine.
Yeah, that was well answered by Peter. Obviously, we're not as far along as they're building and they're about to put their lights in. I get that. But yeah, Al offered to answer, like, is it a policy? Obviously it's not a bylaw, so we can't enforce it. And I listened, but I don't work in government, so I don't know. It's hard for me to understand. So I'm just wondering, like, can we take this dark night skies policy farther so that it actually has some impact? Well, I think it is having some impact, but I'm hearing from my neighbor friend in that neighborhood that he's getting all these new bright lights shining in his windows now. Yeah.
I'd sort of look to staff members, what we might do if we wanted to make that more enforceable, that policy. Can we make it a condition of building permit in residential zones or part of that process? Once a property is already zoned, or a development permit process might cover off some of that as well. But once we're beyond that, I'm not sure what we can do. Mr. Rogers, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Yes, thank you for the question, Mayor Anderson and Christine Lowther. There isn't much that we can do about this that I'm aware of. You know, lighting on our streets and of personal houses is not a building code issue. There may be some items that we can look at in terms of development permits for the whole community, or potentially, I don't even think we could do it through zoning because it's not a use, it's just it's a light. And so this feels more like a neighbor to neighbor use your blinds. If we're starting to talk about people's lights and other people's windows, we can spend some more time on it, Peter and I, to sort of explore what's potentially possible in the development permit realm. But again, generally that's not something that can happen in a residential neighborhood. These development permits are generally to deal with downtown and commercial stuff. So I think you know, developing dark sky policy, help making sure that people follow those, you know, through a zoning process, for example, it's probably the best that we can do. And then potentially a nuisance bylaw if there was something like a bright floodlight in someone's house versus a porch light. So I think I'll leave it there, but happy to spend some more time researching if council wishes.
Okay, thank you. Not sure if you're satisfied with that answer, Christine, but it's what we know right now. I think if council wants to pursue this any further, it might be wise to sort of look at some other municipalities and see what's in place, and see if that's something we want to bring here. It'd be good to do a little backgrounding on it, I think, before we consider any motions moving forward. So that's my suggestion. I'm not sure if any other council members have a comment on that or not. Councillor Law and Councillor McQuaid.
I do know a little bit about the legal issues behind this, but I can share those with you, Aaron. I did research this at a personal legal level, and there's some federal legislation that can come into effect here, just to be aware of people's right to enjoy their property without having neighbors' lights excessively bright, diminishing their enjoyment of their private property. So there is some federal legislation that bears if bylaws don't cover it.
Councillor McQuaid, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thank you, Acting Mayor Anderson. I'd be more interested in our community initially pursuing this on a neighbor to neighbor level. I think that we have to be mindful of what we put on the plate of staff on a meeting to meeting basis. So I'm hesitant to recommend staff pursue it any further without acknowledging that there might be something that we have to remove or take off the plate in order to put this on it. And while I do understand that it's of concern to the community, I'm just mindful of how deeply we'd like to get mired into something like this, and how deep our direction to staff would be. So I would be in favor of holding off on any staff direction today.
Okay, thanks for your comments. Any other councillors wish to respond? Okay, I guess we will move on then. And we're going into our closed session. So I would ask a councillor to move the recommendation to go into the closed session. Councillor Law, I think, was that you?
I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 901 CE, K, and L of the Community Charter for the purposes of discussing labor and employee relations, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements, discussions related to the proposed provision of municipal services that are in their preliminary stages, and discussions with municipal officers and employees about municipal objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purposes of preparing an annual municipal report.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded. All in favor? Motion is carried.